Hey, I'm Dave Morris, and I'm joined by the champion of all that is sports, the Oklahoma's deputy sports editor, Mike Kaler. Mike, football season just around the corner. That can mean only one thing. It's Oklahoma's definitive guide to gridiron glory, the Oklahoman's football preview. Give us an overview.
Well, Dave, all summer long we've been looking at the centennial of sports in Oklahoma, trying to name the best of the best in the state's long history. Well, the football section is just going to be the pinnacle of that. Not only are we going to look ahead to the fall and what to expect this season, but we're going to name the top 100 Sooner football players of all time, the top 100 Cowboy football players of all time. And in one of our most ambitious projects, we're going to take every high school in the state that plays football, and we're going to tell you who their best player ever was, along with who their best player on the field is now. So this isn't something that people are just going to keep for that first weekend. This is something people we're going to keep forever. They can fold it up, they can put it in their family Bibles. People who really love sports are really going to embrace this section.
An outstanding resource for football. Mike, when can people get their hands on this?
Well, like every year, it's going to be the Sunday before the first game. This year, that's August 26th, so go ahead and circle your calendar.
All right. Now, recently we held a press conference-like discussion here with some of our sports experts at the Oklahoman to get their thoughts on the upcoming season. Mike, tell us how that went down.
Well, it went pretty good. I was joined by our columnist, Barry Trammell, OU beat writer John Helsley, OSU beat writer Andrea Cohen, and Ryan Aber, who oversees our high school coverage. And we talked about what to expect in the football section and what to expect in the season ahead.
Okay, let's check out the videotape. Roll it.
I'll just start on the end with John Helsley. John's going to, if you could just talk a little bit about, the Sooners for the upcoming fall, what the storylines are. I guess searching for a quarterback's number one.
Are they searching for a quarterback?
That's what I hear.
And that is the number one question I hear wherever I go is who's going to be the quarterback. And, at this point, Bob Stoops doesn't even know, or so he tells us. There are some other storylines. They've got a great battle going on at running back to replace Adrian Peterson. Alan Patrick is back from a year ago, but they had a freshman, DeMarco Murray, who jumped out in the spring and really excited everybody. They've got to find some linebackers, defensive ends on that side of the ball. So there are storylines other than quarterback, although that's the one I think that everybody's focused on.
Do they have a guy who can take over for Adrian? I mean, Murray had a good spring. Is he the guy?
Well, I think he's part of the equation. I don't know that he's an every down kind of running back, but Alan Patrick, I think everybody saw last year what he could do. He's kind of a combination of speed and power. And, I think they've got, with those two guys, they've got Chris Brown, another young guy who jumped in there and played well for him last year as well.
And what about the defense? We'll just talk about that for a little bit.
Yeah, the defense, if you guys remember last year, the defense really struggled at the early part of the season. A lot of the fingers were pointed at the secondary. They shuffled that area around, and now all of a sudden the secondary is the strength of this team with Reggie Smith, Nick Harris, who came on to play really well for them last year. They've got to find some linebackers. They lost Rufus Alexander, who's kind of been the heart and soul of the defense for the last several seasons. And they've got to find some guys up front, the big fellas. But I think overall, the defense is going to be strong again.
All righty. Well, we'll skip down here to the other end of the table. Have Andrea talk a little bit about the Cowboys, who looks like they'll be pretty decent on offense, at least we know that.
Yeah, they're expected to have the really, really exciting offense between Bobby Reed at quarterback, Dantrell Savage at running back, and then Adarius Bowman, who's one of the top returning receivers in the country. If you listen to what everybody has to say, he's really, really good. The interesting story is going to be on defense if they can improve. They have a new defensive coordinator this year. They're changing a lot of their schemes, but people are really hopeful. Tim Beckman, he comes from very winning programs. He was at Ohio State most recently. So the big question will be what will happen with them on defense, but their offense should be exciting no matter what.
Does Gundy, is it fully his plan in place now? I mean, especially with the offense, are they finally where they want to be?
I imagine they have to be getting there. They have a couple of question marks, who's going to be the secondary receiver, things like that. But I think offensively, yeah, they're pretty potent offensively.
Okay, let's go over to Ryan, talk a little bit about the high school ranks, just as an overview. And I want to leave as much time as we can for questions here. But Ryan, we had some really good teams, really good athletic programs last season. Like Millwood and Carl Albert, who won titles in McGinnis. titles in virtually everything. Is that going to kind of be the same tradition-rich programs are going to win again this year?
Well, it looks like certainly Millwood and Carl Albert are going to have another really good chance in 6A. It's going to be, can anybody knock off Jinx again? And Carl Albert should have very little problem winning a 5A state championship. Millwood's going to have some more competition this year. They don't quite have the deep number of athletes they had last year, but they'll still be right up there near the top.
Everybody's favorite subject is recruiting, obviously. Talk a little bit about some of top 3 or 4 kids in the state.
Well, Muskogee has a couple of the best ones. A receiver by the name of Jameel Owens, who's been recruited by everybody, and a defensive lineman by the name of Stacy McGee. Defensive line is probably the deepest position this year in the state, with Tanner Shuck from Jinx also being one of the top 3 players. At quarterback, you've got a guy, Nathan Stanley, at Tahlequah Sequoia, who has had a really good summer, got offers from Michigan, among others. And a couple kids from around this area, Joe Stoner and Kai Staley. Stoner from Carl Albert, who's moving from quarterback, going to do a little bit of everything for them this year, and Staley from Guthrie is really in about the same position as Stoner. He's going to move away from quarterback and be a running back, a secondary guy, and do a lot of different things for them.
Any, sleeper teams, I guess, teams that might sneak up on us this year, who maybe weren't as good last year or kind of middle of the road last year?
Well, it's hard to call Tulsa Union a sleeper, but they did get knocked off in the first round of the playoffs last year, struggled, got rid of their coach. They've got a guy, Kirk Frederick from Owasso, who did a really good job there last year, and I think they're going to be back near the top.
All righty. Barry, you can clean up here. Just talk about what you think about overall the season coming up. We had an exciting season last year with the Fiesta Bowl at the end, maybe one of the greatest games the Sooners have ever played. What are your expectations for both teams?
Well, I expect Oklahoma to win 11 games and lose 2. Which 2, I'm not sure. I think they're going to lose to Texas because whoever won the OU Texas game always wins the next year, and it takes a cataclysmic event to change that. So Sooners need some sort of lightning to strike to turn that tide. So I think the Sooners are a clear second in the Big 12 right now. They don't have a quarterback, and you could get by with that in 1973. I'm not sure you can get by with that in 2007. So I think it's going to be an interesting year. They're, they pay Bob Stoops $2.8 million to win championships. So I think you better win championships. I generally think football coaches are overpaid. If OSU can win 8 games, they ought to throw a parade. They're going to be pretty good, but they got a very tough schedule. Everybody says they can go to Georgia and win.
65%.
A lot of narcotics being passed around in the state. I heard John Holcomb on the Blitz the other night said OSU has a 65% chance of winning at Georgia. USC wouldn't have a 65% chance of winning at Georgia.
Is there some sort of calculation?
They got about a 15% chance of winning at Georgia. They also go to Troy, which is down in the sticks of Alabama. OSU will go down there thinking it's 2007 and it's going to be 1942, so that's going to be a tough place to win. They go to Nebraska, they go to Norman, they go to College Station. If they can win 7 or 8 games, that's a great season for them. OU's going to come down to the Texas game. They got lucky last year. They lost to Texas and still won the South. That'll happen about once every 20 years. So don't hold your breath. If they lose in the Cotton Bowl, don't make any reservations for the Big 12 title game. The season will basically come down to that game. Although we've got a great matinee on September 8th, Miami comes to town. I call them a pirate ship of a football program. Their guys carry chains and guns and play really good football. Luckily, the good news for Miami is they do have an experienced quarterback. The bad news for Miami is he's not any good. So I think Oklahoma can win that game. That should give them a lot of confidence, but that'll be fun. So, I mean, it's going to be a fun year. It always is.
I have a question. About the OU upcoming season. It's been interesting the last few weeks to see all of a sudden there's a lot of momentum building up about their season, about the story about that's surrounding OSU. When they walked off the practice field in April after spring practice, I didn't see all the hype about what I'm seeing now. What's happened in the last couple of months that's made the media wake up and realize that OSU is on the steps of maybe having a pretty special season? Now, granted, Barry made a great point there. They've got a tremendously tough schedule. I think there's 8 bowl teams that they've played from last year. So it's going to be a tough schedule. But there's some people overlooking that, and not just local media, but national media, that's saying these guys could have a special season. What's happened in the last couple of months that makes them think that?
Football season got closer. Is the biggest thing. I mean, all the preview magazines start coming out around this time, and that's when everyone starts talking about football again. And OSU is a really popular pick for all the national media as a sleeper team, and that's the biggest thing. I mean, they've gotten a ton of national press over the last 3 weeks or so. I mean, just they're a team that everybody's talking about. But I think that's the main thing is just that it got closer and it's time to start talking about football.
Andrea, how big of a factor is that game with Georgia? Because it seems like, in addition to sleeper team, it's also early game not to miss sort of deal in all this magazine.
Yeah, exactly.
Too.
It's one of the biggest games that's going to be played that first week, and so that's what makes them. I said they're a sleeper team for a lot of people because if you pick them as a sleeper team and then they go out and beat Georgia, you look like a genius. It's a really easy way to, and it's just making a lot of people look at Oklahoma State early. That Georgia game is.
Okay. I've got a quick other question to that.
No follow-ups.
Darius Bowman. Darius Bowman, is that his name? I get it wrong sometimes.
Yeah.
Will he be hyped as a Heisman Trophy candidate? I'm starting to see some of that talk. Will OSU really put a machine behind him, or will they let him kind of get into the season before they ramp that up?
Yeah,
and I'm curious about OU too. Will they have a Heisman candidate that they try to get on the list this year?
I'll let John answer the OU part, but Bowman12.com has been up and running for a couple months now, which is the Heisman hype for Bowman for OSU. So I don't think that I think they're kind of trying to push him more for the receiving awards because it's hard for a receiver who doesn't do any, he doesn't return kicks or anything like that. So it's hard for a guy like that to win the Heisman. But I think that they're hyping him for all kinds of stuff.
John,
he's a really marketable guy. I mean, well-spoken, likable guy. So he's, an easy person to kind of hype if you're them.
John, anybody with the Sooners?
Oklahoma's in a similar spot. Their best player is a wide receiver, Malcolm Kelly, another guy who's very marketable, well-spoken. The problem, as Andrea alluded to, is wide receivers have a hard time winning the Heisman these days, it seems like. But if they have great seasons, I think you'll see them mentioned. Phil Steele is a guy who puts out one of the big magazines, and he actually has DeMarco Murray as a Heisman contender, which he hasn't taken a college snap yet, and it's kind of crazy. But, if you saw him in the spring, and if he can do anything like that in games, what he did in the spring, he's a guy that could at least make it interesting and exciting.
All right, we probably got time for one more to keep on schedule here. So, anybody else?
John, Moses Madu, he's a pretty good athlete, but with everything ahead of him, what are they going to do with him?
The bad thing that happened to Moses was he had an injury in the spring, and it put him behind, and here they have this log jam at running back. And so they've got to find ways. One, he's going to have to kind of earn his way back into talk to be a guy that gets some reps. And the other thing is they're going to have to find a place for him. And it might be in the slot. And he's a guy that can catch the ball as well as run it. I think they'll look at him as a slot receiver, just to get his hands on the ball in some open field.
About OSU, Mike Gundy fired his defensive coordinator, then took a couple of months, seemed like, to hire another guy, Tim Beckman. And the last game Tim coached in, he was a secondary coach for Ohio State in a national championship game against Florida. And he didn't do too good in that game. Now, apparently he did pretty good at Bowling Green as a defensive coordinator for a few years. But what do you think? Is he really the answer? Can he get OSU's defense to actually get off the field in a third and long situation and just to not give up? What do you think?
I mean, obviously that remains to be seen, but I would say that the defensive players seem like they're really, really excited and really, really buying into Tim Beckman. And that there's just kind of a lot more excitement on the defensive side of the ball from everybody I've talked to during the spring and just over the last couple of weeks. It seems like he's been able to motivate them to a level that maybe they hadn't been that excited about in a while. So, I mean, I think the potential's there. What do you think, Barry?
You ask a good question. OSU last played good defense in 1984, Pat Jones' first year. I don't know. I don't know if he's the problem or the answer, but I don't think they're going to stop people very much.
They're probably their biggest question mark is D-line. I mean, Ryan McBean's with the Pittsburgh Steelers. Larry Brown's gone. Can they get a defensive line to stop the run or, get a good pass rush going?
They're good on the ends. The interior is going to be really young. So that's where it's going to be really interesting. It'll be. I mean, and if Rashedi Jones can get healthy, the stud they have coming in, if he's going to be big enough, I mean, he's a true freshman. The ends. I think the ends are going to be good.
They're going to have to outscore people. I mean, they're not going to beat anybody 14-10. They're going to have to beat people 35-30.
Okay, here's a dose of reality question for John. I know you mentioned the defense started slow last year. University of Alabama, Birmingham, Watson Brown gashed them for a lot of yards. They barely won that game 24-17. Played Washington the next week. The guy runs up the middle for a touchdown. It's 13-13 at halftime. This year, Oklahoma's second game was against Miami. Now, they fired Larry Coker away from a team that showed some promise, pretty good young team. Can OU handle the athleticism of Miami? Will they be ready for that game, or will that be the second game that they lose, as Barry alluded to?
It's going to be a real benchmark game for them. The biggest problem I see in that game is Miami's very good on defense. They have a lot of players back, and they're very good on defense. And Oklahoma is going to have basically a guy who's playing his second game of college football at quarterback. That's going to be the big issue in that game. It's going to be hard for Oklahoma to score. And so they're going to have to win one of those 14-10 or maybe a 10-7 or 10-3 type game. It's the way it looks right now. I think that's going to be a huge test at quarterback for Oklahoma.
2005, OU started a new quarterback and lost 4 games. Do you agree with Barry that they're going to lose 2, or do you think the over is 3 or 4?
I'd say maybe 3. And the thing that sets up well for Oklahoma this year is their schedule, where Oklahoma State has a tough schedule. A lot of their big games are on the road. For Oklahoma, they've got a lot of their big games at home. They're home for A&M, home for OSU. And that Miami game you talk about, that's at home. They've got to go to the Cotton Bowl, obviously, and they go to Texas Tech. Those are their big road games. So the schedule sets up right for them. They're a heck of a home team. And, they have a chance, I think, to maybe to keep it at 2. And if they win that game in the Cotton Bowl, it may be a one-loss or better season for them.
Jeff, go ahead.
Hey, Ryan, one more quick one. First of all, on picking a best player ever at every high school in Oklahoma had to be just a huge undertaking. How did you do that?
Continues to be a huge undertaking.
Yeah,
Don't talk like we're done.
And then,
not even close.
And then just follow up with that real quick. If you're picking the best player at every high school in Oklahoma now, when you get to Shawnee, you got to think Tucker Brown. How can they justify that kid getting another year of eligibility?
Coach Brown nominated Tucker for the best player of all time, I think.
Well,
right?
yeah, some guy named Darian Gordon, I believe, went to school there. But to answer your first question, what we did is we sent out ballots featuring every school to a pretty large group of guys who've been around high school football for a long time coaches, and other people who've been around, a long-time writer, Ray Soldan, and took their nominations, and now we're sort of sifting through those and making some calls to other people around and just trying to get as much information as we can before we make those decisions. We don't want to just go off what we know, me being around for the last 20 years paying attention to high school football, and other people even less. So we want to make sure we get the best player in each of these programs. Now at Shawnee, I think Darian Gordon is their all-time best player. But yeah, I mean, Tucker Brown's our best player this year. There's no question about that. And we're going to treat them like we treat everybody else.
You talk about that extra year he got. Can you explain that a
well,
little bit?
For some of you who may not know, he was a senior last year and blew out his knee early in the season, I believe the 3rd game of the season, and was out of school for a couple years. and he petitioned the OSSAA for an extra year of eligibility, or an extra semester actually. He started going back to school in January. Apparently at Shawnee there's a class that he had to take that he could only take that first semester and wasn't able to make it up. So he would have had to come back to school anyway, at least according to his dad and him. And so he's going to be able to play another semester of football, pick up in the third, I believe the third game of the season. He got injured in the second game, and so he'll be able to play the last 8 games and any playoff games.
And that's the same kid who held up the playoffs 2 seasons ago with the lawsuit over his suspension, right?
Yeah, the continuing saga of Tucker Brown. But I think it's also, I don't think there's any doubt about it that part of it is to get him a better shot at playing in college. I'm not sure he will. He's a little bit undersized, but I guess if you can do it by the rules, why not?